Do you know Leo, currently the biggest YouTuber for teaching European Portuguese? He has been an expat himself, so he has a unique perspective to share.
I have a vision of Portugal that I can see it both from a local's perspective, but also having lived abroad and then come back and then worked in tourism as a tour guide where you have to talk about the country. That forces you to have like a bird's eye view of your own culture, where most people usually only know their culture from the inside.
As he learned more about his country, what happened?
I started developing more of a passion for Portugal itself.
He gives advice about learning a language.
But you really do need a teacher who understands the language from an outside perspective.
How has he seen Portugal change, and what does he think can be done?
More of a protectionist regulation of how far rents can go so as to protect, in theory, because then
Leo, you have the biggest YouTube channel for foreigners to learn European language, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
But let's back up and talk about how you got there. And I think maybe people don't know too much about you, so let's talk about your life story as well. So where are you from? And tell us a little bit about Portugal itself.
Okay, so well, I'm from Portugal, as you know. I'm from Lisbon, Portugal, born and raised. I think I started discovering Portugal when I first started traveling abroad. I think it happens to a lot of people where you take your culture, your country, the way things look, the way things are for granted or as being what's normal until you either go to another city or to another country, and then you come back and you start appreciating more what you always thought was just the normal way buildings look or the way sidewalks look. Because in Portugal, you probably noticed this, our sidewalks are very unique with the little cobblestones, like a lot of these little details, or the fact that your basic cup of coffee is a strong espresso, which is hard to find other places, and I really, really miss when I'm not in Portugal.
Okay.
When I was 18, I moved to another city, Madeira, an island off the coast of Africa, part of Portugal, and already coming back from those 2 years living in Madeira, where I did my first 2 years of university, already I noticed a few differences, and if I started looking at Lisbon more as a tourist, my own city, instead of just the places that I grew up in, you know, where I went to school, etc. Because I'd been somewhere else and I'd been a tourist somewhere else, you come back and you kind of come with that gaze into your own city, right? Then when I was 21, I studied a year abroad in Italy. Beautiful country, like I think the country in the world with the most things to see, you know, monuments and history and all that. So I was very much a tourist there. I really wanted to dig into the culture, etc. And then I brought that curiosity back into Portugal. So thanks to these two experiences, I learned to see Portugal through the eyes of someone who's not from the country, like through a tourist's eyes or a foreigner's eyes or an immigrant's eyes, let's call it, or expat or whatever. So I think I have a vision of Portugal that I can see it both from a local's perspective, but also having lived abroad and then come back and then worked in tourism as a tour guide where you have to talk about the country to tourists who are here only for a few days, who don't know anything about it. You have to give like context and explain the history and the little nuances of the culture, etc. That forces you to have like a bird's eye view of your own culture, where most people usually only know their culture from the inside.
Yeah.
It's a very sunny country. Life is easy here, I would say, in the sense that people are fairly relaxed. The weather's good, food's good, like the quality of food is good, and it's not that expensive. Restaurants can be a little bit expensive, especially in the big cities like Lisbon, Porto, but it's not hard to go to the supermarket, get what you need. People are friendly. Maybe they're not as gregarious or open or extroverted as Spaniards, for example, or Italians from the south of Italy, or Brazilians, which are like at the extreme of a very friendly, open country. But we are certainly on the friendlier, open, warmer side of Europe. Or compared to Americans for that matter too. I mean, Americans are a lot more smilier, expansive, you know, greet you with a smile, how's it going? Show interest about your day. Europeans are more reserved than any Americans, north or south, but I think we're on that middle point between typical Europe and typical USA, South America, etc.
Yeah.
So it is a country where people are friendly. We tend to know languages, at least English, to some extent, at least people my generation. We grew up exposed to everything in foreign languages, subtitled, like I'm talking about TV shows, movies, etc. That's how I learned English. A lot of Portuguese people also understand French, for example, because it was an important language here. I guess up until my parents' generation, so older people will speak French as their second language, It's their first foreign language. We tend to understand Spanish too and kind of speak it, a few people. I had this conversation with a French friend of mine where people have the idea that the French are standoffish and not super welcoming. And when compared to Portuguese people, for example, I think one of the key factors is that when people are not comfortable speaking a language or not speaking in their own language, they won't interact with you as much.
Yeah, so it comes off like they're
being standoffish. Whereas us Portuguese, we'd rather speak Portuguese if the person in question doesn't have great English or whatever. I mean, you were just talking to my parents. They spoke to you in English. Even though you speak Portuguese, even though their English isn't perfect, they're happy to try to
just communicate,
get their point
right?
across
And
in English and make mistakes, whatever. So I think people tend to appreciate that. You probably know this better than I do because you've been living here a few years. You've had your experiences as a foreigner moving to Portugal and being welcomed by the locals. Those two factors, the fact that we are able to communicate in English and other foreign languages to some extent, the fact that we're relatively open to other cultures, which also probably stems from us being so exposed to stuff from other countries and other languages, I think makes Portugal a very welcoming country.
Yeah.
And the food's good. Yeah.
That's amazing, yeah.
And it's a beautiful country too. I think both landscape and also architecture-wise, we're not too far behind countries like Spain, France, in terms of monuments, stuff to see. Yeah.
Now I noticed you said Madeira rather than Madeira. Why did you pronounce it like that?
So why did I not pronounce Madeira in Portuguese? Because I was speaking English. And I think it just flows better, at least for me, at least in the languages that I really speak well. Right? It just flows more naturally to say the words with the accent, the phonetics that I'm saying them in.
Of the language you're speaking.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I mean, okay, you know the word Madeira because you live in Portugal. But if I were talking to any other English speaker, or not even English speaker, but speaker of another language that I speak in English to because it is the common language, right? I'm not going to assume that if I say Madeira, they're going to know what I'm talking about. And that word is actually similar. For example, Levi's. We say Levis in Portuguese. If I were talking about the pair of jeans that I bought at Levis, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Because if we are speaking English, you are expecting the words to come out in English.
Right.
And the word for Madeira in English is Madeira. Just as the word for Lisboa is Lisbon and the word for Nova York is New York, right? So I am going to say the names of the places in the language that I'm speaking, usually normally, if I know them.
So would you say that traveling around and living in different places is what started your love for languages and wanting to help people learn European Portuguese? Or like, why did you end up starting this?
Yeah, good question. So I've always had a fascination with languages. I know I speak very good English. When I tell people, yeah, because I grew up watching American TV shows, they're like, yeah, but so did my neighbor, who's also from Portugal, same as you, and he doesn't sound like you. I had enough exposure, like any other Portuguese, to foreign languages when I was a kid. I had the same opportunity for exposure. For some reason, always been very drawn to languages that are different. That happens to me with English and Spanish growing up. Like I grew up with enough English and Spanish that through the exposure that I have and then my natural interest, I kind of learned them natively at different levels, like L2, L3, but where you don't really remember not knowing them and you kind of know grammar intuitively. So I kind of always spoken these languages and always just took for granted that I just know these languages.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gift, right?
Yeah, it's like I just know English. For some reason. And I even started reading in English at a very young age. It was actually because Harry Potter would come out in English first.
Okay.
And then in other languages because J.K. Rowling didn't want any leaks, any spoilers. And so I remember I was very much into the books. I think it was the 5th book came out. My mom was also reading them. She's like, I'll just read in English because she's an adult who knows English. I was still a kid. I was like 13 or something. And I was like, I'll just wait for the normal book. Because to me, Portuguese was normal, right?
Right, yeah. It's your native language.
You grew up with that language. But yeah, and then the book came out. I read the book in Portuguese. And then the 6th book came out and she again bought it in English because she didn't want to wait those like 2 months. At that point, I was like, you know what? Let's see what this looks like. And I just opened it, started reading it. And it's just, yeah, okay, some words were different, like 'cause some terms are also different in the Harry Potter universe. We tend to take the original word. So like Muggles were Muggles, Hogwarts was Hogwarts, Gryffindor was Gryffindor.
Okay.
Whereas in Brazil, for example, they translate the names of even some of the characters' names. So most of those names were the same. So I was just reading through and I understood the story and yeah, I guess I can read in English. Good.
Yeah.
Actually, looking back now, I remember a specific word that I did not understand, which was D-U-N-N-O, which now I know is super British slang for don't know.
Okay,
Right?
yeah.
So even now, like only learned that as an adult, but like everything else. So I've always had this inclination towards languages. And then when I did my first exchange in Italy, I wanted to learn another language, Italian, right? And I needed to because I was going to spend a year abroad. And that was the first time that I started a new language, from zero to finish. The first language that I remember not knowing anything about, like not knowing how to even say ciao. Why is it spelled C-I-A-O? Makes no sense. I know they say ciao, but this word doesn't seem like the thing they're saying from becoming fully fluent. So that was the first language that I discovered or rediscovered this passion for it, but also this perfectionism that I have with learning languages really well. And so having learned Italian made me want to go back and improve my Spanish.
Okay.
And want to go back and improve my English too. I think consistently improving, even though I already spoke Spanish, more or less, English really well, but there's always room for improvement. I improved a lot in the last few years. I think those years it was 2013, 2014 is when I moved to Italy, but also the years prior when I started traveling with friends instead of family. So it was the mix of starting to travel the world, living abroad, being in international environments, being in environments with people from different countries. Like that's when the bug bit me, both for travel and for languages, and just for this enjoying being surrounded by people from different cultures, speaking a bunch of different languages, blah, blah, blah. And so I was studying medicine. I didn't say this, I studied medicine, right? So it is a pretty set path, right? You study, you graduate, and then you go work at a hospital.
Okay.
And which was not very conducive to international environments, traveling, etc., which had become, after this year abroad in Italy, had become my passion along with the languages. And so, I finished my studies, I graduated, but I was already feeling like this is not what I want to do. I worked as a doctor for a few months, like as an intern, pretty easy stuff in Portugal. The first year is not too hard, not a lot of responsibility. And that's when I started thinking about trying something else, at least to have like a gap year where I can travel and explore this passion for other languages and cultures, maybe work as a tour guide, maybe like stay at hostels and work at the hostel to like pay for my lodging and whatever. And I ended up doing that. And also that was the time in my life where I discovered that you can be a digital nomad and you can work online, blah, blah, blah. So I traveled to Asia. I traveled with a friend of mine. We started traveling together. And then come back to Portugal. I need money. I start working as a tour guide where knowing English really helps. What I told you before, where I really started seeing Portugal through the eyes of people coming from other countries. I was slowly building this perspective, this broader knowledge of the world or perspective. Like I traveled to Asia, I lived in Italy, I lived in Germany too. Traveled in South America. Like suddenly I didn't just know reality through the eyes of a Portuguese. I had known different cultures. Also the fact that you learn those languages makes you dig into the culture more. And then coming back and meeting all these tourists from other countries and explaining Portugal to them really made me see Portugal, like I said earlier, like from a wider perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was working in tourism. I was enjoying it. I really felt like I had a knack for it, like talking to people and moving my hands a lot. And I developed more of a passion. So first it was the passion for languages and for travel and for different cultures. And then as I started learning more about my own culture because of needing to explain it to tourists and showing the city and explaining the history, I started developing more of a passion for Portugal itself. Like I said, seeing it from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
I was super into tourism and I was enjoying what I was doing. I was like, I'm going to do this for a few years and then see if I can move into something more entrepreneurial and more digital nomad-y, something that I can set up and work from a laptop. But then COVID hit, because this was 2019. Then COVID hit 2020, suddenly no more tourism. And that's when it was just the right push for me to start my YouTube channel, because it was a point where I developed public speaking skills through working as a tour guide. I'd also developed some knowledge and, like I said, passion for Portugal itself, for its history, its culture. And I already had a clear idea that I would one day want to be a digital nomad and work online. So it was the perfect moment. Like, I'm stuck at home with nothing to do. Probably the same for you guys when you started your channel. Like, you're not doing the channel because you have some goal. You start because you're bursting with ideas and stuff that you want to talk about, and you're bursting with the need to put content out there.
Yeah.
It's not like a means to an end, it's the end in of itself, like the content. And so that was me. Like, I remember I wrote a list of ideas, and it was like 40 ideas for podcast episodes / videos. It was the outlet that I had been needing for over a year or something. And so it was super easy to start, because also I've been consuming YouTube since 2006. It's my favorite platform for everything, and in English too, which is another reason why I speak English. I've always spoken English. I've been watching YouTube and consuming it actively and learning stuff on YouTube. I learned how to play the guitar. When I started learning Italian, I started on YouTube. Then German, same. I had lessons for a while, but it was mostly YouTube. And other languages that I've learned, like French, also on YouTube. So it just became so natural for me to teach something on YouTube, which to me is like, it is naturally the platform where you learn stuff. Talk about Portuguese culture, because it's something that I've been talking about for 1.5 years. Talk to a camera and try to work exclusively for my content. So try to become a digital nomad.
Yeah.
So it's just very natural.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine being a student of the language, like different languages before, actually makes you a better teacher.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, so this love for languages. You know how oftentimes, most times, people can't really explain their own language? Grammar is just natural.
Right.
It's just the way things are. Like, sometimes it's, depending on what your level is and what you're trying to learn, it's usually better to start with a non-native teacher of a language when you're at a high level, or have both, but like then transition to a native speaker who can just tell you, like, this is the more natural way that we say things. I can't tell you why. But you really do need a teacher who understands the language from an outside perspective. Because I learned all these languages and I really analyze language, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I think I have developed that, and I think that's why people like my videos usually. I have comments, and even my courses too, like, oh, you explained this. I recently launched a B1 level course, the intermediate course, and it was my first time doing like full level course with all the content, like all the stuff that you're supposed to teach at that level, and I was a little like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. But I remember one comment in one of the videos, which was, 3 teachers have explained this to me, and this is the first time I understand it. And yeah, makes me realize, like, gives me the confirmation that I'm doing my job well.
Right, yeah. Which feels good, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been an expat and a tourist yourself, so coming back to Portugal, you kind of have a feel, especially a lot of your students who are expats who have moved here. So I think you can kind of relate with them as well, what it's like to be a foreigner.
Yeah.
And so you enjoy tourism as well. So how have you seen Lisbon change, I guess, is what I'm wondering, because this is a hot topic, right? Lots of tourists, Lisbon, Porto, and Portugal in general, lots of expats. But you've been one yourself, so maybe you have a different perspective than someone who's never been an expat themselves.
There's people that like to hate on tourists without realizing that they make a difference. There was a period where we had just come out of recession, like the crisis that started with the housing bubble in the US, 2008. Then it slowly moved into Europe. 2011, I think, was the year where we were hit hard. And then Portugal and some other countries that weren't doing so well economically, like notoriously Greece and other countries, did really bad during those years. I was much younger, but looking back, I remember we went through a period of austerity, where economic activity wasn't super high. Like, people were saving, people were not spending money. And that didn't do much good to the economy. Life was kind of boring. People were not happy. Like, people tried to save by eating at home, so restaurants were closing down, which meant more people were going out of, their businesses were failing. So, and then COVID was kind of something similar. So that only goes to show that we need a bustling economy. We need economic activity. We need people to be spending money. We need people to be contributing to local businesses, to purchasing goods, products, food, whatever, markets, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And tourism brings in a lot of that. So tourism is obviously positive. I mean, there's entire countries whose economies depend on just tourism, and they're very happy. that they have tourists
Right.
and they fight for them. So for the average person whose life is not impacted positively by tourism, who doesn't make money from the tourism sector, but then sees their commute or their rent prices or whatever going up, or the tram that they take to go to work consistently packed full of tourists, for those kinds of people who maybe deal with the negatives but not the positives of tourism every day directly, tourism is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just like with everything and with anything in life, right? If you live in certain parts of certain countries, you're going to benefit more from being in a specific industry than others. This is completely unrelated, but kind of the same, which is in San Francisco and like the whole Silicon Valley area in the US, things became very expensive ever since all the tech bros started moving in, huge wages. And then the people working in other sectors, which are not tech, suddenly their lives are a lot harder because they're making money that is below that average that just increased, and all the rents went sky high, et cetera, et cetera. It's a similar thing here where if you're in an area of Lisbon that is like super central, where rents kind of were pushed up because of not just tourism, a lot of other factors, but that's also a factor, like Airbnbs, blah, blah, blah. And then rent prices go a little bit higher, and then you're a person who grew up, like your parents and then your grandparents, you grew up in the neighborhood of Alfama, which is like the oldest, most quaintest district in Lisbon, or Moraria, or one of these places that are very in demand right now, and suddenly you can't afford to live in your own neighborhood. It's tough.
Right.
But that's just, it is what it is. There's different solutions that can be proposed. Some solutions will require, okay, let's limit, regulate more, like people can offer as far as like place for tourists to stay in, blah, blah, blah. Let's limit tourism in one way or another. Another solution would be more, let's accept that it's the reality and just people are gonna have to move to other parts of the country. Like, no one wants to completely cut off tourism or to just let the market fully dictate what rents become in Portugal, because then you're going to have entire districts that are like where no more locals live. So the ideal solution is somewhere in the middle there, but different people will have a different opinion on what is more ideal.
Yeah.
More of a conservative, not conservative, more of a protectionist regulation of how far rents can go, so as to protect, in theory, because then
That's a whole other thing, right?
that's a whole other thing, whether or not rent control works. But in theory, protect the tenants more and make sure that people can afford housing, or more in the direction of not imposing rent controls because let's let the market fix itself. But then there's the possibility that some districts, and usually the more traditional ones or more quaint, more beautiful ones, will just become tourist attractions and
Right.
no locals actually live there.
So would you say for Portuguese it's quite mixed on the sentiment of tourists, but then also people moving? So a lot of people, like Lisbon's quite desirable. So there's been a big shift in the last, let's say, 10 years of what Lisbon has looked like. Would you say that the Portuguese are mixed? Some embrace it and say it's good for the country. Some hate it and don't want it to happen? Or how
I think so, yeah. I think up until a few years ago, countries had standards of living. Portugal's standard of living is lower than Spain's, which is lower than France's, which is these days, because we're so connected and so many people work online and it's so easy to move around and so many expats, I think it's less of a country thing and more of a city thing. Cities have different standards of living when compared to their countryside counterparts in the same country. Portuguese median rent price is 200 euros less than the Spanish median rent price, which is 200 less than France, and then Italy, and then Germany. Now it's like Lisbon is one thing. It's comparable to Madrid and Barcelona.
Yeah.
But then other parts of Spain are more comparable to other parts of Portugal.
Right.
And then Paris is a whole nother, like it's super hard to find an apartment, super expensive. But then you go to like the northwest of France and it's probably cheaper than Lisbon specifically, but not cheaper than the rest of Portugal. And so it's become like more of a big city problem.
The economics of the cities, right?
Yeah, and not just a Portugal exclusive or Lisbon exclusive. But obviously some have it worse than others. And Lisbon is, I think, notorious for being, at the European level, a city where there's a lot of people coming in. So obviously there's more demand, not enough supply. So rent prices go up. It's just how it is. Like people
Right.
need a place to live. but because wages don't depend on just the demand for living in the city, they depend on the country's economy as a whole. Wages don't accompany this increase in rent prices, and so there's this huge disparity between the cost of living, especially when we're talking about rent prices in Lisbon specifically, compared to what people actually make. But then if you go to Barcelona, it's the same problem. And it's not just because of tourism, it's because of a bunch of factors. Even not just tourists coming and going, obviously expats coming in, but also people in Portugal wanting to move to Lisbon because it's a more attractive city compared
more
to
opportunities.
More opportunity, like internal immigration or migration, right? Happens everywhere. In the US, same thing. New York, LA, right? These big cities that attract a lot of people. Paris in France, like I said, Berlin in Germany, where they also had a housing crisis or problems. Even I think they're still having or just a few years back where you had huge long lines of people just going to look at apartments to try to become the tenants, right?
Yeah.
So it's a brave new world, I think, in that regard. And I mean, I certainly am not equipped to tell you what the solution is because I don't know. I just analyze what I can see from my perspective and from what little knowledge I have. And obviously people have their own opinions, which are then shaped also by, I think, a lot by their political leanings. So if you're more on one side of the spectrum, you'll blame, like we were saying, rampant tourism and a lack of control in that regard, or you'll blame more like rampant immigration and a lack of control in that regard.
Always some sort of
There's
blaming.
always, yeah, and it's, in reality, it's just a lot more complicated than that, I think.
Right. So what would be some advice you would give an expat who wants to move to Portugal to be able to adapt and to have a good relationship with the locals?
Yeah, so your viewership, hello, people watching us, they're mostly English speakers, right? So I think, for example, I did an episode with a friend of mine who's from Spain, and one of his questions was, like, should us Spanish speakers just speak Spanish directly to Portuguese, or should we speak English instead? And like, it'll depend, but some people can take it the wrong way. Take it like, oh, I'll just speak Spanish because it's the same thing, right? So, but for English speakers, starting with the language first and then moving on to other things, obviously no one expects anyone to learn a language of the country they just moved to in the beginning. But some effort goes a long way, like learning basic words like bom dia, good morning, obrigado, basic words that you're going to use in any customer service, like buying groceries, going to the shop, whatever, any of those situations. If you can just learn those basic words, first day you're here, already use those. And then if you're interested in staying in Portugal, then little by little, learning the language and using it, because you are going to benefit from a better experience if you know the language, obviously. Because even though people speak English, it's not the same sitting at a table with a bunch of Portuguese people, everyone's just speaking in the language that flows. Because not everyone speaks great English. A lot of people speak really good English, but communicating in the language that isn't your first language, it's just not as easy, right? And so people are not going to just be themselves.
Right.
So if you are the foreigner coming here, you are going to be the minority in the group. So if an entire group of people has to not be themselves for you to understand what they're saying, it just doesn't flow the same way. And then it's easier for them to be without you, right? So this is like a long-term perspective, because learning a language well takes time, takes years. But in the long run, if you want to make the most of your time here and really call this place your home, much like with any other country, you're going to want to learn the language. But if you start off by just from the very beginning learning very basic words and showing curiosity, like, oh, what do you call this in Portuguese? Even if you're not going to remember it.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking to like the lady at the grocery store and she said, and you obviously start with the bom dia, whatever, but then you switch to English, you go like, sorry, I don't speak Portuguese. She will understand. Right. Then you ask stuff you're interested about the culture, whatever. People are going to like you for that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So language and just really a curiosity of the culture and the new country that you moved to.
Exactly.
And it's just appreciated.
I think so, yeah. If you're not the kind of person who's always comparing things here to stuff back home, you want to not be that person, right? Like you go to a restaurant, whatever, and it's like, and they take forever to bring the bill because we do things slower here in Portugal. It's like, oh, dude, they're so slow here. Like back home, service a lot quicker, blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of comments you want to keep to yourself, right?
You're right, yeah.
Even if you think those things.
Or just really kind of get them out of your head and embrace the fact that this is a slower culture. And
exactly.
so you'll be a lot happier if you just know,
if you just embrace that, you know? Also because when people move to a country, they usually want the authentic experience, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you don't realize that you are having the authentic experience in the moments that you're waiting in line at the grocery store, or that you're walking through the cobblestone streets and you're tripping because it's raining and they're super slippery. It's the authentic experience. It has its positives and its negatives. It is what it is. Yeah.
Leo, you mentioned that you launched this B1 course, and I think it was a lot of work, and so congratulations on getting that going.
Thank you. Actually, I was thinking I'd like to offer your audience a discount.
Oh, thank you.
We've been working as affiliates in the past with my pronunciation course, and I wanted to add this one, the B1 course, and offer for both courses, anyone who's interested, 20% off through the links. I don't know, you're going to link this in the description.
Yeah, amazing. So if you want to get a discount on Leo's courses, then check the description for those links and the information there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So don't forget to subscribe and check out those links. Now, let's get moving.